As everyone is celebrating the success of the South African rugby team, one question does come up. Why is there such a big gap between the rugby team performance and the performance of Bafana Bafana, the soccer team, the cricket team performance, and the performance of Bafana Bafana? I mean, if you look at the rankings, right now South Africa is ranked at number 1 in rugby. It's ranked at number 3 in cricket, but it's ranked at number 64 in soccer by FIFA. That is a massive gap, a massive gap of about 61 places. Something that is irreconcilable if you think about the performances of the rugby team and the cricket team at the various World Cups. Why is there such a gap? 3 reasons. Number 1 is history. Number 2 is politics. And number 3 is the Premier League. Let's go through each of these. Let's start with the history. Did you know that South Africa was a founding member of the International Rugby Board and the International Cricket Conference? South Africa has been, from the very early stages, involved in these sports, rugby and cricket. And these sports have always been highly resourced. However, they came to be almost a segregation of sports as time went by. And the white sports received a significant amount of funding, but the black sports and the black areas did not. In fact, when you look at historical acts, the Bantu Education Act and the extension of the University Education Act, these acts prohibited blacks from attending white institutions. They prohibited black schools from receiving the same level of funding as white institutions. So what that meant is that the sports that were played in the white schools got to develop much quicker and much better than the sports that were played in the black schools. And the academics who have looked at this, and Robert Archer and Anton Bullion are some notable academics who've looked specifically at this, and this is what they said. By savagely curtailing black access to education, urban residence, employment, wealth, and the freedom to associate, to travel, and to free expression, the nationalist government necessarily stunted the natural development of sport and dealt a crippling blow to the attempts of black players to improve their standards of play and organization. In 1961, an announcement was made by the Minister of the Interior, Senator Jan de Klerk, and what he said is that the government would not approve of the participation of mixed teams in global sporting events, that mixed teams from other nations would not be welcome in South Africa, and that only separate white and non-white teams could compete abroad in international competition. In 1963, de Klerk outlined 4 principles of the National Party's sports policy. Each racial group would form separate controlling associations in each sport. White associations would control the code, send representatives to the World Federation competitions, and assist in the development of black associations. Racially mixed teams would not represent South Africa, and sports officials would not invite racially mixed teams from abroad to play in the Republic. So what this did is that it created segregation in sports. It created segregation in sports development, and that segregation in sports development is still very manifest on the ground. So what you'll find is that if you go to private schools, if you go to former Model C schools, you'll find that there's a lot of sports infrastructure, sports leagues, sports development, and that now is funded largely by the private sector, by parents through school governing bodies. And that part of sporting world in South Africa, well resourced, and the player development from primary school, from high school, is very complete, very thorough, very robust. So you have a lot of players coming into the professional league very polished, and there are good professional leagues, more on that later. But when you look at the township schools, they're not receiving the same amount of resources for the development of all of these sports, but particularly even the sports that are popular in the townships, and in this particular instance we're talking about soccer. So there's a history to this, is what I'm trying to say. But let's move beyond the history, because history is not enough to explain the current underperformance of Bafana Bafana versus rugby versus cricket. The other element of this is administration, mismanagement. The Minister of Sports was asked, or made a comment rather, at the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, about Bafana Bafana. This is what he had to say.
Help us with Bafana Bafana, man. With Bafana Bafana, you need the mindset. You need the culture. What is this culture? You know, to the change room of England. It was with Princess Charlene. What happens in that change room? I realized how I wish I could get Bafana Bafana in the same room with my box.
Yeah.
Just the spirit, the culture, the commitment to the sport and the love of sport. Rest for Bafana Bafana for me.
It's quite interesting to hear the minister speak unreflectively of the role of government in the development of sports and the development of soccer. The reality is the South African Football Association has been mismanaged for a very long time, implicated in various corruption scandals. We all saw what happened when the girls team made it to the World Cup, and when they were now looking for their payments, there was a whole lot of drama. SAFA has been grossly mismanaged, and when there is a need for government to be able to close the gaps that were created by apartheid, even that level of mismanagement causes more glaring gaps to become apparent. So mismanagement is a big issue, and the government failure, the failure of the Department of Sports in and of itself to develop soccer, to create the structures that the minister was talking about, is really one of the big reasons why the soccer performance has failed to reach its potential. Soccer is a very popular sport in South Africa. Children want to play it, teenagers want to play it, everyone wants to play soccer, but there's just not enough development, not enough school leagues, not enough leagues for youth to be able to participate in. And as a result of that, there's not enough player development at the ages when it makes a difference. A lot of world-class players, whether it's Mbappe, Messi, what's this guy's name who I'm thinking about, Wayne Rooney, when you think about David Beckham, a lot of these players were developed from a very young age. So when you don't have government closing the gaps created by apartheid, and you don't have the private sector participating in that way, government has to carry the weight, and they fail to do that. There has been gross misadministration of soccer in South Africa, and that has to go with saying. Then the third thing is the quality of competition in the Premier League. This is what the South African Bafana Bafana coach had to say.
All those players are playing in big European teams. Fiorentina, Sevilla, PSG. We don't have those players. We don't have those quality players who are playing in Europe. And we can look at the fantastic race that Sundowns and Pirates did in the Confederation Cup and in the Champions League. But Sundowns lost the semi-final. Pirates lost the final. And who won? Two Moroccan teams. Wydad Casablanca won the Champions League, and Berkane won the Confederation Cup. When I talk about quality players, and when you see that even in Morocco there was no player, I repeat, there was no player of those teams in the selection except the goalkeeper. I think that shows enough. And therefore, again, let's face the problem. Let's face the problem of South Africa. And the problem is that the level of our PSL is not high enough. We don't make players with high quality. Our best player, I think you agree, our best player is Percy Tau. He has problems in his team.
He's right to say that. He's right to say that the quality of play in the Premier League is not competitive. But I want to add something extra. I want to add why there's a challenge with the quality of play and why there's an issue with competition. Part of it is because you have one team that is buying up a lot of players, buying up a lot of coaching staff, and creating an anti-competitive environment. And this is what Jabu was speaking about when he spoke about this particular issue. If you recall, this is what he had to say.
Bafita awasabukela amagame PSL okhithi mina personal senyahluleka ukubukela amagame PSL and istandard se PSL bafita isdrope kakhulu and manje sayikhuluma sayisuggesta indaba ye financial fair play la ku PSL amasandawana ama-fans ngoba obviously any fan, any supporter, you want vele your team to win all the time, but this thing ehenzakalayo manje bafethu i-national team yethu kushuthi seyifile manje nani sasikhulume nje iqiniso sekeleni ukufavor bafethu something must be done.
So the reality is the issues that affect Bafana Bafana are multi-layered. One is the history, apartheid, the segregation, the lack of funding. Two is the mismanagement of the soccer governing body, the failures of the Ministry of Sports, Arts and Culture to actually play a leading role in sports development, particularly soccer in this particular instance. And also, finally, the monopolization of the league by one team through having too many resources and through there being no FIFA fair play. That issue is important. When you have one team with unlimited resources, they can definitely affect the outcomes of the league, make the league uncompetitive. And this is what you're seeing. Whenever you have a monopoly, wherever that monopoly may exist, what you're going to see is a loss in competition, a loss in quality. And this is why monopolies are generally regulated against. And this is why in other countries you have various forms of dealing with lack of competition. Fair play rules are one of those. In America, in the NBA, they have the draft system, and they also have cap and trade. Not cap and trade, I can't remember what it's called. They have caps for how much you can spend on players in a particular season. All of those things are to keep the NBA competitive. And that's why the NBA has a rotation amongst who wins, who loses. But you don't see that in the Premier League anymore, because Sundowns wins everything because of the amount of money that they have, that they are monopolizing the top of the league, and that's why it's not competitive. So all of these things affect the quality of player long term. If you don't have a high quality player competing in a competitive league, they're not going to develop to the point where they can go play in Europe, in the Premier League, play in Bundesliga, play in the French league and all of these other leagues, La Liga, which are very prominent. And as long as that continues to happen, we're not going to see Bafana Bafana catch up to the level where cricket is and where rugby is.